everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, it struck me as I was listening to Congressman Lewis and to Larry that in the years I've been covering or working in the environmental space, it's been amazing how the idea that the environment and the economy are not enemies, that you can have economic growth and a good environment, that idea has gone from sort of greenwashing to mainstream to something everybody believed in, and now we're sort of at the risk of having it demonized again. I think some of our panelists today will give us some good ideas in how you can cultivate sustainable communities and bring jobs along with them. What we'd like to do is I'll kick things off up here by having each of our panelists say a few words about the kind of work they're doing and how it contributes to sustainable communities and good green jobs. And then we're going to want to open it up to questions from the floor. So think about what you might want to ask some of these panelists. It might be a follow-up on something they tell you, or perhaps you're working on an issue where you work and you could use some helpful advice and guidance. Well, these folks are just the people to ask. So I'd like to start with Carlton Brown. He's a founding partner and COO of Full Spectrum. It's a national leader in developing affordable, green, smart buildings in emerging urban markets. And Carlton has worked everywhere. He's worked in, I guess, West Africa, Louisiana. He's worked in New York, where he's the only developer appointed to Mayor Bloomberg's Sustainability Advisory Board. Now Carlton and his firm are working on an ambitious project here in the Southeast. It's in Jackson, Mississippi, and it's all about sustainable communities and job development. Carlton, let's talk a little bit about that. Tell us what you're doing in Jackson.
Well, you know, Jackson is a place that has been sort of divided by class and race for a very long time. People are sort of separated into their little alcoves. And the first thing that we believe, if you're going to start to create sustainable communities, you need to tear down those man-made social barriers, whether they're class, race, gender, et cetera. So this is a project that we've conceived and rezoned to create building performance guidelines for a 14 square block area that is mixed income, low income, market rate housing, offices, and retail, where we focused on local retailers. So there are a lot of businesses that had left downtown, and in a large sense, African American businesses were never part of downtown. So we are creating an inclusive community, and I think when you start talking about environmental justice and restoring the environment and good jobs, you have to be inclusive. And so I think that's an important thing, and especially for Jackson. And in Jackson, we committed to doing this project with all union jobs, which is just sort of unheard of in Jackson, Mississippi. And it raised a lot of eyebrows, but over the time, as we've gotten a lot of approvals, people are starting to see it differently because we've actually attracted new businesses and helped start new businesses that will be in this development.
Now I can see how redeveloping this area, it's in the redevelopment process, you've got good green jobs going on. But my understanding is that as well, there are permanent jobs associated with this and a permanent sense of sustainability. Some of the features that this area will have will make this a more sustainable community. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, there are, and you know, so often we get focused on the construction jobs. But quite frankly, for this first phase of it, the construction jobs will last 2.5 years, right? But what's important, we are creating about 800 new permanent jobs there. Some of it is in managing the building, some of it will be new jobs that are coming into the area, and we're looking at different ways of managing resources. You know, I think here in Atlanta, everyone recognizes that water resources are really vital because a few years ago, we nearly ran out here in Atlanta. Well, the same thing happened in Jackson. The reservoir nearly went dry, right? And so one of the things that we're doing is we're collecting storm water, we're collecting black water and all the water from the toilets, cleaning it up and using it for a central chill water plant for the entire facility. We're using that for irrigation. We're doing soft infrastructure so that we collect all the storm water off the streets. Because up to this point, the city of Jackson had been putting 9-point source pollution into the Pearl River Basin, which is immediately adjacent to the site. So now we're collecting the water, we're using it a different way with rain gardens and soft infrastructure, and we're looking at that way, and we're generating about 10% of our power on site from renewable energy sources. So it's a very different way. So we're creating jobs in energy, we're creating jobs and maintaining a green street streetscape. We're creating jobs, that we're bringing jobs back into the state for new businesses that we're bringing that want it to be in green buildings, right? Second thing is what I think is really important. We aren't going after national retailers, right? We've worked on all local businesses that were elsewhere but are opening a second location in this community. So it's creating a sort of vibrancy that wouldn't otherwise have been created.
Let me ask you one more question on that, Carl. What kind of businesses are deciding that, hey, this sounds good, this is a place we want to open up shop?
We have, what do we have? We have a pet store, we have several restaurants, we have a bakery, we have, I'm talking about the retail businesses now. We have a craft shop and a couple other retail businesses. And for the commercial businesses, we have an architectural firm that's expanding there. We have several GSA offices that are moving there. And we're negotiating with a call center that's looking at moving people back from overseas here to this market because they think that, one, they want to be downtown, they want to be in green buildings, and it makes more sense to be in a market like Jackson where there are 40,000 students, in that community, and it's a source of jobs for them. So it's really at the center of this sort of revibrancy or reinvestment in the city that we think would be transformative and be a catalyst for other work there.
And housing is part of that as well.
Housing is a big part of it. Our first phase has 154 residential units, and they're mixed income. It's being built to a LEED Gold standard, and the office building is being built to a LEED Platinum standard. And we have a near zero carbon robotic garage for 500 cars, I believe.
Sounds like Jackson's going to really be hopping.
That's what we believe.
Thanks, Carl. Well, to introduce our next panelist, I want to, for those of you who are not from Atlanta, I want to set the table a little bit by talking about the Beltline. The Beltline is a bunch of old railroad corridor. It's kind of a circle that goes through Atlanta, sort of a necklace, and it links 45 neighborhoods. It's about 22 miles of railroad corridor. The idea here is to turn that into a green ribbon, put in trails and parks, but also put in transit and transit-oriented development as a way of knitting Atlanta together and developing in a very sensible and sustainable way, because as you may have experienced firsthand, our traffic is a bit of an issue in this part of the world. So this is a way of bringing people together along transit closer into the city core. And if you'd like to learn more about the Beltline, by the way, there's a panel on it tomorrow, and I'd recommend it to you. They're talking about 30,000 new full-time jobs coming into the Beltline. It could be, the next Atlanta airport or the next Atlanta Olympics in terms of the next big development news here. So imagine this Beltline, and it's a green necklace through Atlanta, and one of the beads on this necklace is a community called Pittsburgh, and our next panelist has done a lot of her work there. Mtamanika Youngblood is president and CEO of Sustainable Development Strategies Incorporated. She was the director of neighborhood transformation for the Annie E. Casey Foundation Atlanta Civic Site, and she was also the founder of the Center for Working Families, and that works to strengthen families and neighborhoods as well. And Mtamanika, could you tell us a bit about your work trying to develop sustainable communities right here in Atlanta, especially given some of the unique challenges the community you work in has been facing?
Right, so if we think about Pittsburgh as one of those pearls in the necklace, it's a pearl that has had a rough life. Pittsburgh in the Atlanta area is what is characterized as ground zero for foreclosures. It's been particularly hard hit by mortgage fraud, a lot of investor foreclosures, and so it's a neighborhood that, while it's on this lovely necklace, is in many ways in need of refurbishment, of revitalization, and of renewal. What we've decided to do is to look at this opportunity that is presented by now much lower housing costs as a result of the devaluation because of the foreclosures, as a way to acquire as much property as we can on behalf of the neighborhood, and to revitalize the neighborhood by taking advantage of this wave of sustainability and greenness to really create a neighborhood for working families that is positioned to be sustainable. Oftentimes, low-income communities are kind of the last to know, the last to be able to take advantage of new technology and innovation. And we are determined that this community is going to be a leader in terms of a follower. And so being a Beltline neighborhood is an advantage for us. We have a site that the Casey Foundation owns in Pittsburgh that is 31 acres. It's a vacant site. It's just brown enough to attract some resources for brownfield, but not a real problem. It's an opportunity whose southern border is the entire Beltline for transit-oriented development. We're looking at attracting a light green manufacturing for job creation. It's a requirement. We're also looking at the potential for an urban agriculture. It is 31 acres, 7 minutes from the Atlanta airport, right on 75, 85, and of course along the Beltline. So logistically, it's a great opportunity for job development and job creation. So we're looking very seriously at attracting those kinds of industries. In the meantime, we are working to revitalize the neighborhood, and as part of repositioning the neighborhood, we have taken the position that everything we do will be green and sustainable. So our houses are all Earthcraft standard. We spend a great deal of time getting families to understand the value of not just the structure, but of operational efficiency for the structure, so that their energy costs do not exceed, which have been the case, particularly water in Atlanta. Their energy costs do not exceed either their rent or their mortgages, which is certainly possible in the current environment. So we've spent a great deal of time making sure that we build and create housing that is as green and sustainable as possible, but also working with residents, with households, and with the community to understand that we can position ourselves as a community for working families as one of the greenest in the city.
You know, that can be a real challenge when you've got families that are, I mean, this is a neighborhood that's really been beaten down. You've got some families who are just holding on.
Right.
How have you found that you're able to, it's one thing to convince somebody who, you know, is making a good living and doesn't really worry about their financial future to make an investment or to in some green aspects of their home. It's another thing if somebody's just holding on and having trouble paying the groceries. How have you done that? What kind of messaging has worked? How do you work with these families?
The messaging that works is dollars and cents. If you can save this money from your electric bill or your water bill, you get to take your children to the movies, you get to save some more pennies for a new car, or potentially to own the home that you may currently be renting. I mean, folks understand the benefit of having more money. And what we've been able to do is to characterize that saving in a way that is real for folks. The difference, this is what your energy costs were prior to the work we've done. This is your energy cost now. You can see it. We collect their bills. We use it as an opportunity to show them that, in fact, this is good, solid, logical, sensible living in a way that is good for you and your family because it saves you money.
And are you able to see that some of the work that gets done is done by people in the community?
Yeah, we have a very strong perspective around that. We have contractors and others who work, because we're doing a comprehensive revitalization strategy. So we're doing other things besides housing, but in terms of ensuring that residents are involved in the planning, in the development, and obviously at the end of the day, in living in these houses is our specific focus. While we want to attract others to the community and to the neighborhood, obviously for a greater mix of incomes, which is our stated goal and intention, we are very focused on making certain that we improve this neighborhood for the benefit of those residents who are there and who have been there for the long term.
Thank you. And Louis Partain is our next panelist. He's recording secretary for the North Georgia Building and Construction Trades, and as well as vice president of the Georgia AFL-CIO. I'm sure it's not going to surprise many people in this room that the building trades have had a very tough time of it lately here in the Atlanta area. But Louis is going to give us the union perspective and also some interesting projects that he's been working on. You might have heard of the Atlanta Better Buildings Initiative or the Emerald Cities Collaborative. Louis, from the building trades perspective, what's going on with sustainable communities and jobs here in the Atlanta area?
Well, we've been working with the Emerald Cities here in Atlanta to create some jobs along the energy efficiency retrofitting buildings. There's about 62 million square feet just within a 400 square block area in downtown that's being targeted to retrofit all these buildings. So it's quite a bit of work. The mayor has committed to lowering the amount of energy and water used in the city of Atlanta by 20% by 2020. And when they came out with the Clinton Global Initiative, the Better Buildings Challenge, Mayor Reed went up there, I think it was in Chicago, and he was one of the first cities to sign on to it. There's 3 cities, Atlanta, Seattle, and Los Angeles. So we're getting support from the business community, the city government, and the building trades are interested in getting these to be high road jobs. And that will be union jobs, high road jobs, and also making sure that the community gets something out of it. But we want to use like a community workforce agreement, which would specify that a certain percentage of the entry-level people that get into training programs for these jobs would come from areas in the city close by that have not benefited from those kind of jobs in the past.
You know, green jobs have obviously become a bit of a political football lately.
Right.
You know, with people saying, "Oh, these aren't real jobs." How do you answer that? What do you tell people?
Well, there's a lot of work that can be done. You know, that you can replace heating and air systems with more efficient, and it's one of the more expensive, but just doing the building envelopes. I mean, you know, we had that tornado here a couple of years ago that blew all the glass out of that Westin Peachtree Plaza building, where they ended up having to replace the whole skin on the building because the glass on the building was so old and it was out of code, and also you know, that was a $40 million job. It was a huge, big project. It took them quite a while to do, but they actually replaced it with a much more energy efficient glass. But then you got lighting, heating and air, and then another component to it is the permanent jobs. The people that operate the buildings need to be trained to operate them properly to make sure that the equipment is used as efficiently as possible.
Now, talking about, could you put it in a broader perspective for us in terms of construction jobs and building jobs in Atlanta over the last several years? What kind of losses have we seen, and what kind of potential do you see in the sustainable community green jobs possibility?
Well, it's been pretty rough. My particular local, I'm in the painters local, and we've probably got 30 to 35% of our members out of work right now. Some of those members have been out of work for 3 to 6 months. You know, we're in the building trades in general. There's people that have been out of work for a real long time that probably will go on ahead and retire. And so that is going to cause us to need to bring more people in and train them. But there's some projects going on in Georgia that are a little far away, you know, that are going to be pretty big, and they're going to need more people. But here in Atlanta, the work just along the retrofitting all these buildings, that will create an ongoing long-term process. And as energy costs go up, you know, it's going to be of value to building owners and operators to reduce their costs. It's the same as what Mtamanika talked about residential. The same thing applies to a big building. I heard a business leader yesterday say that, you know, if he's thinking about investing in a building and their energy costs are $30 million a year, but they could do $5 million worth of work and save $15 million, then they're wasting money by not doing that work and making their building as efficient as possible. So there's a great opportunity for a lot of work in that market here in Atlanta.
Thanks, Louis. Larry, we heard a little bit about, you know, your take on the issue of sustainability and green jobs. You talked a bit, I've heard you suggests that moving to clean energy jobs it's a growing, going bet, whereas sort of relying on some of the old ways of powering our country, that time may be over a little bit. Am I reading that right?
Well, I think about the BP oil spill, and one of the lessons that we should take out of that is cutting corners cuts jobs, but it also causes enormous ecological damage. And I think, when we think about clean jobs, we think about having job safety. 11 people died in that accident. We can do a lot better than that. And I think by doing the kind of, 40% of our energy in this country is in buildings. So there's a wonderful example of how we can go after more efficient buildings and lower our dependence on these fossil fuels. It really matters, I think from my vantage point, it matters how fast we get there, because we're already paying a price for not moving quick enough. And that price is going to get bigger year by year. The price is going to tick upwards. And so I would say let's find a pathway to get there quicker, and by doing that we'll be able to reemploy those people who are sitting on the sidelines right now and get them back deployed in good work that will make our world safer for not only us but for our children and for their children. So to me it's a win-win all the way around, and it's simply a matter of all of us working to cut through the political rhetoric today that's interfering with a new path forward.
We talked a little bit about the Gulf. Are there other examples you can give us in the Southeast where sustainability and caring for the environment go hand in glove with sustainable communities and good jobs?
Well, if you look at coastal regions, there are 32 places in the United States where we can, in fact, and Duke University looked at this and identified 32 areas where we need to make serious investments similar to what's going on in Louisiana, which again creates jobs, will help restore these coastal communities, will help restore the fisheries, help restore the tourism that has traditionally gone to these places. That all needs to happen. But it's not just in the coast. We need to also make cities like Atlanta more resilient. The idea of cutting the amount of water being used by 20%, reusing wastewater for new purposes, repurposing water in a way that will reduce our overall demand. All these things are going to help us have a more sustainable, a more durable economy. And I think it's very exciting that people are innovating, they're seeing opportunities, and they're advancing new ideas. And this is about new ideas. It's about finding ways to solve problems that we haven't done in the past. And I think it's also about controlling the amount of carbon we're putting in the sky. And if we make that our priority, we will make all sorts of changes. And those changes will in fact drive jobs. But it's a matter of how fast we want to move. I want to move fast. I want to move as fast as we possibly can, because it will reemploy all the people who've lost jobs, and will create a better world for our kids.
And that the economic opportunity is an interesting point. You've got globally, investment in clean energy, for example, hit a new record last year, $260 billion in new renewable energy investment alone. So this isn't even, efficiency in that part of the ledger. That strikes me as potential for real development, real good jobs.
Absolutely.
I'd like to open it up to the floor. We have a microphone. If you would have any questions for our panelists, I'd encourage you to come on down to the microphone. Let us know who you are, and if you could kind of make it a little bit more of a question than a statement. I'm sure in this room we have a whole lot of people who could talk for half an hour on any of these issues. But let's try to include our panelists in that. Yes, could you tell us who you are, please, and what's your question?
My name is Dwayne Barton, and my question is, how can you ensure that isolated, disenfranchised communities are going to be at the table as part of the development? And what type of trainings do you get the individuals and communities involved in to prepare them, and not only the communities, but also the policymakers, the bankers, and the developers? And I do a lot of outreach in my community, and a lot of older people feel that this new Sustainable Communities Initiative is just urban renewal with a green dress.
And where do you work? Tell us what you do.
I'm the co-director and co-founder of Green Opportunities out of Asheville, North Carolina.
Thank you so much. So that's a good question. I mean, how do you bring the community along? And Mtamanika, you were kind of an expert at this.
Well, you know, I think the way you bring the community along is that it's really clear from every thing you do that the community is front and center and in some ways leading the effort. We consider the work that we're doing as an equitable development example of what can be done along the Atlanta Beltline, for example. So we would be equitably developing even if we weren't, but it's an opportunity to model, I think, good behavior. So residents are at the front and center of the policies we create. We've just about to complete a master plan for the entire neighborhood. It's been led by a group of resident leaders. We are very clear that this is a strategy that is an inside-out strategy, not an outside-in strategy. And so the way to make certain that everybody benefits is to make certain that everyone is included. And so our notion about inclusion in thought leadership, in actually doing the work. We've been working with Georgia Stand Up, an organization here created by labor some years ago, and eventually, as a result of the work we were doing in community and the recognition that young people, particularly young people in low-income neighborhoods, often lack the training to get to a point to be an apprentice, to get into these good union jobs. And so together, we thought of, and eventually Georgia Stand Up created an organization called Georgia Trade Up, which is a pre-apprenticeship program that trains young people out of communities, out of our neighborhood and in the neighborhoods that are like ours, to learn building trades, but to learn it in a way that it is connected to their communities. And so they've, you know, when I look at, I get very excited because I look in the class, these are young folk. They're folks who heretofore, you know, I see them hanging out in front of the store or, you know, on the street. They're in this class. They're women, they're young men, and they're getting jobs eventually. And so, and they're learning a skill, but it's connected to their lives. It's not some distant, unattached opportunity. And so inclusion is important, having residents front and center in all aspects of it. And what they don't know about development, we've helped them learn and train them to understand so they can be part of it. And then to make certain that when those jobs they're able to get them because they're trained and ready for them.
And Carlton, I imagine you're a bit of an expert in this as well. I mean, I'm trying to imagine myself being a resident of Jackson, Mississippi, and this New York developer comes down and tells me he's going to make my town better. How do you involve the community? How do you get buy-in?
Well, you know, we work in a lot of places. One, I'm originally from Jackson, Mississippi.
Well, you're allowed.
So,
Give it a pass.
but we work in a lot of places where where we don't really have roots, and right. So one of the things about us is we are a bottom-up development team, you know, and some people in Jackson just didn't quite understand that. The way developers work in Jackson is you go buy a piece of land, you get it approved, and you do whatever the heck you wanted to do. What we started off with was about 20 community meetings to talk about, you know, how did they envision their community today, what were the deficits in it, what were the strengths of it, and what did they think would take to make it more sustainable. And around those sort of community symposiums, we developed a master plan that eventually became a zoning ordinance, which eventually became a building performance guideline. And then as we moved into phase one, we started out working with the unions there, the mayor, the county, and what we did is we identified communities by census tract with the highest poverty indicators, and have gotten commitments that the contractors and the unions will train first and select first, you know, in those communities with the highest poverty indicators, because as someone said here, frequently those communities are not included. Mm-hmm. In Jackson, the challenges are a good deal different from probably Atlanta, because there is not as much infrastructure in terms of organizational infrastructure and people that have been traditionally unempowered trying to be empowered, particularly in this space. When we started talking about green development in Jackson, there were people that I grew up with and said, well, you used to be normal, what happened? And so what we've done is we've started to really change the dialogue. Now the important thing you have to recognize is that Jackson is the capital. It's really two cities, right? It's the center city, which has about 180,000 people, and then there's the metro region, which has about 600,000 people. The center city is predominantly black and poor. The metro area is much richer than the median for the country because it's driven by the healthcare industry. And so one of the things that has happened is the healthcare industry has been growing. Jobs have actually been growing in Jackson during the recession. When you look at the Brookings Institute report on the top 5 MSAs in the country through the recession, Jackson was number 3. And so what has happened is you've had a whole bunch of skilled jobs growing, but this sort of inner city core not being engaged. And what we tried to do is focus on a development strategy that would engage this inner city core that probably has fewer job skills, certainly not the sort of graduate degrees and medical degrees and professional degrees that you need to be involved in the medical tech business, right? But to give some other basis for including people. And so as we started to talk to people about what we were doing, the jobs that were going to be created, and the training, they started to get it. It was slow, but you know, we got designated for this project 5 years ago. And so the process has been very slow, and we're just breaking ground this quarter for the first phase.
I guess patience is necessary in this line of work.
Yeah, certainly if you want to do something that's right and different, right? If you want to go the sort of normative course that doesn't get us to where we need to be as a society or as a country, then it can be a lot quicker. But if you believe that your business is really the business of transformation, it is slow.
Natalie, I wanted to say something real quick about, he asked a question about how do you get the community engaged, and then the training component, and Mtamanika touched on it. Well, Georgia Stand-Up's been around for about 6 years in Atlanta. They've been doing really great work in getting the community engaged in what does the community want. So there's, if you're in Atlanta and a part of a community that feel like you're not being heard, I think there's been there where the group is there to get them engaged. The Georgia Trade Up, the building trades have been instrumental in helping them get that started. That's been a really good program. We've put a few people to work out of there in my local, and they teach them the soft skills, give them exposure to a lot of different trades, and they can make up their mind of which craft they want to go into. But it's really good because it's bringing some of those folks from the inner city and the surrounding area and trying to get them into the trades, give them exposure. But the soft skills is the important part, because a lot of folks don't know you got to be at work at 6 o'clock in the morning on the other side of town. You better be there. You're not going to get to work.
So it's folks that maybe haven't, it's not like they can look to, a brother or a sister or a father for maybe how to be a member of the building trades. Maybe their family doesn't have a tradition of working in it. Because I'm from Pennsylvania, it's, you know how it is. Your brother, your father, everybody was in the union, and that's how you get in.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have that tradition in your family, getting in must be a little tough.
The building trades unions are changing because honestly people aren't really beating the doors down to get in. But there's just a huge demand for skilled craftspeople, starting to be. I mean, it's not right now, but as the attrition comes on, it will be. But they're coming around.
Yes, sir. Tell us who you are and what your question is.
Good morning. I'm Dr. David A. Paget. I'm the director of the Geographic Information Sciences Laboratory at Tennessee State University. I recently completed a project with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency where we developed a green careers curriculum specifically for HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. And so my question to the panel, which is a question that we often have in academia, is for potential employers in the green industry or in the green economy, what specific coursework or curriculum would you suggest that our students really focus upon in order to make them most employable so that they can get something for all the money that they spend in tuition after they graduate, particularly in the green economy. And our primary objective, of course, is to diversify these green jobs and green careers, especially amongst people of color.
Who'd like to tackle that, Larry?
I'll respond a little bit. National Wildlife Federation has been involved working with the community colleges to better equip the incoming job force in many communities across the country. I think the community colleges have a real important role to play. But I also think there's a need for universities and colleges across this country to take a hard look at what they're teaching kids. Ed Mazaria, one of my friends who started the Architecture 2030 project, Ed often talks about the fact that we are equipping architectural students to build a 20th century building, not a 21st century building. And we ought to be building buildings today, and we ought to be teaching our students today to build buildings that have zero carbon emissions, that actually produce the energy that they need, that have ways of managing their water, and all the other resources that go into that structure. And that's what we ought to be striving for in the building side. I think the same is true in some of the other technical fields. I think we ought to be looking at how we squeeze the most amount of energy out of the energy that we're currently using, and drive the process to equip students so that they're better prepared to play in this 21st century space. If you think about it, it's, you know, in terms of buildings, for example, it'd be like in the 20th century designing log cabins. That's really what we're doing today. We're teaching kids skills that were maybe good in the 20th century, but not in the 21st century. And it's time to move in a very different direction.
You know, there are some things that are going, in another part of my life, I'm on the board of the U.S. Green Building Council, and we have a program called Green Schools, Center for Green Schools, and we've been actually working to develop curriculums for our tribal schools, historically black colleges and universities, and Latino serving universities that really focuses on how do you make the curriculum relevant to the 21st century. Because one thing, sometimes the academic community can be looking at what happened in the past as opposed to looking at what happens in the future. One of the things we're doing in Jackson, Mississippi, where we have an office, we've taken on interns from Jackson State University, which is a historically black college and university there in the city, and we're working with their engineering school and their planning school students so that they can sort of get that firsthand experience at working on it. So I think one of the things that historically black colleges and universities need to do is look for opportunities to form partnerships with businesses and architectural firms that are forward-looking so people can start to get that sort of real-life experience.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks. My name is Lisa Madry. I'm with the National Wildlife Federation, and I work on the Green Force initiative that Larry was just referencing, and we've actually partnered with the USGBC and their Green Schools program as well. It's a great initiative. And my question is really, in our work with the community colleges on job training and job skills, obviously the question that everyone's concerned about is job demand strategies and we want to see an acceleration in the creation of those jobs in communities. So I'd like to just hear if you all have suggestions or success stories about either policies like building codes or incentives or investments that could be made at the local, state, or federal level to help spur job demand in these areas.
Who'd like to tackle that?
I'll tackle it, but it's going to get away from me. So.
Okay. Should I wrestle you to the ground after 30 seconds?
You know, the policy issue is a real challenge. And this isn't so much from our southern work, but from our work in New York. In New York, Mayor Bloomberg has really been aggressive about trying to create policies through Plan NYC that will stimulate the green economy, reduce carbon, create parks within 5 minutes, and a whole range of things. That on paper, they all sound good. Then they get to the city council, right? And then everyone who has a special interest gets to his or her city council person, right? And it's been very difficult to get things through. So we worked for a long, long time in partnership with the Urban Green, which is the USGBC chapter there, on a building performance standard which basically says you had to go in and see how much energy you were using, right? And if you were above a certain thing, have a plan, you know, to amend that. So if you did that, ultimately it would create jobs. It just never got through the city council, right? And whether it was the building owners, you know, Repney, you know, or the plumbers in some cases, everyone had a special interest on it. So from a policy side, at the local level, there's not a common understanding about how important this thing is. And so I think, you know, from having watched what happened in New York, the thing I would recommend is that it really has to be a big education process from the bottom up, you know, so that people understand it, you know. So things like congestion pricing failed, right? We didn't get the building performance code, it failed, right? Some of the other things we got, but a lot of it didn't really fly because it wasn't part of the common discussion. And so we have to make these things a bigger part of what we're talking about every day.
So, just briefly, the Atlanta Beltline Inc., the Atlanta Beltline Partnership and the City of Atlanta come together to really address the fact that when this Beltline is built out, and as it is being built out, you know, it's $20 billion worth of development, and the idea is that there are going to be jobs created. So the jobs will be created. Our challenge is to ensure that people who are in those neighborhoods and who heretofore have not been connected to those kinds of jobs do, in fact, have that opportunity. And so there are policies and procedures that are put in place to ensure that this time that actually doesn't happen. So it's less about creating jobs, but it's more about making certain that the people who ordinarily would not get them are in fact connected to those jobs that are going to be created.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Carol Adams Davis. I'm with Alabama Sierra Club. I'm in Mobile, Alabama on the Gulf Coast. And first of all, I would like to thank Larry Schwiger and National Wildlife Federation for their work post BP oil spill and their continued emphasis on restoration in the Gulf of Mexico and on our Gulf Coast. I am hoping that you might have some suggestions. I'm mainly speaking for Alabama and Mississippi as well, as far as the use of coal power plants. We are desperately trying to get beyond coal in these states, and because of the corporate utility companies, we can't seem to get any movement at all. I know that Southern Company in Georgia and Georgia and Florida seems to have more progressive policies than Alabama Power, which is also owned by Southern Company. So I just wondered if y'all had worked with Southern Company in Georgia, and if y'all have any methods to work with them. It's really hard to even have net metering in Alabama with solar, so thank you.
Well, that is a big challenge down here in the Southeast, isn't it? I mean, we have very powerful utilities that you have to partner with, but you maybe not agree with everything they do. Does anybody have some advice from our friend from Alabama?
I'll just say that sometime, probably in March, we'll see rules come out of EPA, and instantly Lisa Jackson has done a fantastic job moving EPA forward on a number of important issues that relate to public health and safety. But the opportunity is for these new rules to actually address the carbon emissions from not just coal-fired power plants, but all sources of power like that. And I think those rules will help move us in a very important direction. I would urge folks to give voice to support that, because it in fact does solve some of the challenges we have. And I believe that the utilities, a number of utilities, are looking at what the future looks like and understanding that investment in dirty coal-fired power plants that do not control their carbon emissions is an investment in a technology that will soon become a stranded investment. And so they're starting to have real concerns about that, and I hope that understanding becomes more widespread. We cannot continue to put carbon in the atmosphere the way we have been doing and expect to have any kind of a world that's decent for our children. And so I think that's going to become increasingly clear year by year as the storm intensities get worse, as the droughts become worse, as all the other things that scientists have warned us about become clear. But for right now, the opportunity is for new rules by EPA and to urge their swift passage and adoption. The existing power plants will be coming along later, but it's important that we support that action.
Is there a buzzword if somebody wanted to, hit their congressional delegation, I want you to support this, I don't want you getting in the way of these rules? It's called the new rules coming out, are they called something specific?
Well, we've not come up with a buzzword yet, but it's the idea that we need to control carbon emissions. We need to regulate carbon pollution, and that the Environmental Protection Agency is taking steps to do that. And it will have a benefit for public health, and will have an enormous benefit for public safety in terms of reducing the threat. And as we move forward collectively, protecting the planet is uppermost. I would also say that one of the other things that's going on right now is that BP is getting close to a court case, as some of you may know, and we're hopeful that the Restore Act is passed, which will benefit all the states in the Gulf Coast. We're supporting an effort to take 80% of the BP fines that they'll pay and use those to restore coastal regions in the Gulf. And we're hopeful that legislation passes. If it doesn't, we won't have that money available. And we're looking somewhere north of $20 billion for the BP settlement.
So maybe there's some things that maybe you can't do statewide, but
Exactly.
you can latch onto a national effort.
Exactly.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Greg Leroy. I'm the Director of Good Jobs First in DC, and I have a question for Ms. Youngblood. I know from Georgia Stand Up, hey Deb, and folks at Georgia Tech that tax increment financing, or TIF districts, are being proposed or planned for many of the areas around the stations on the Beltline. And I'm wondering, and that's kind of ironic, right? Because TIF is notorious in many states for subsidizing the opposite of transit-oriented development, for subsidizing Walmarts and Targets and Cabela's and Bass Pros, et cetera. Is TIF among the incentives you were referring to? Are you attaching more strings to TIF to promote local hiring, to job quality standards, other things to capture the community benefits?
So the tax, we call them tax allocation districts here in Atlanta.
Right.
Georgia, the tax allocation district for the Beltline is a unique tax allocation district. The revenue that is generated by the increment is for trails, parks, paths. It is not for development. We know that green space is an accelerator of development, and generally higher price development. And so that is not being subsidized with these funds. It's mainly to ensure that the Beltline itself gets built, knowing that the development will come. So we have been working on a community benefits agreement. We have the equitable development plan. I mean, we are trying to put in place all the best practices that are now at our disposal from the hard-fought, efforts of other cities around the country. And so we are determined that this beautiful amenity that the city will have will benefit all of its citizens, not just the folks who generally benefit from world-class amenities. And so we've put policies in place. Now it's up to us to ensure that those policies get enacted and get implemented. Having a plan is one thing, ensuring that in fact it is implemented is another, and we all take that as our responsibility. And we also take the notion, or have the notion, that the Beltline will not be successful if in fact it looks like just, frankly, another big Atlanta development project that does not benefit all of its citizens.
Yes, please.
Good morning. My name's Tony Anderson. I just had a quick comment directly to the question that you asked about the buzzword that we've been using in the youth climate movement. It's kind of the best way. We've been thinking in 5 words of this entirety of what all this is about. Slow, stop, and reversing carbon emissions. Like, that's what this is about. Everything else is inputs into that. Reversing sequestration, obviously, slowing, efficiency, stopping, clean, going clean. So that's kind of the 5 words we've been using.
Thank you.
We have time for 2 more questions. Okay.
Penultimate question.
Good morning, Debbie Nissen with Ulico. Hey, Carlton, I haven't seen you for a while.
Oh, hey, right.
Your project sounds great, a perfect example of good jobs, green jobs. I want to know how you financed it.
It is the craziest piece of financing I've ever been involved in. And Debbie, you know we've been involved in some crazy things. But we're working with Steve at the Housing Investment Trust, and he's buying, he's buying the FHA bonds for the housing. We have a new market tax credit that covers a portion of the garage in the office building. And we have a state industrial development bond for the office building. We have basically some legislation actually passed in the state that provided $20 million loan to the county, which we run through the new market tax credit structure to pay for the garage, the central chilling plant, and the soft infrastructure for the streets. So it's as crazy as it comes.
Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Steve Breslow. I'm a Sierra Club official in Tampa, Florida, also a founding member of the USGBC Florida West Gulf Coast chapter. And I have another question following up on that one, which is that I'm very interested in possibilities of creative financing in green job creation. And yet, despite the fact that we have the lowest interest rates, I think, in many, many years, obviously, lowest existing housing prices in at least 10 years, lowest land prices, maybe going back 20 years or more. It seems to me there's tremendous opportunity out there right now in the midst of our economic slump. And yet I'm hearing very, very little about creative financing techniques for green job creation. And it seems to me there's just tremendous opportunity, but I'm not hearing much about it. Is there a resource center, or can you point us all toward more of these sources?
Good question.
I'd like to respond, first of all, to the point you're making about the great need that we have and why we're not moving fast enough. National Wildlife Federation and a number of other organizations supported the climate bill that worked its way through the House and died in the Senate. But because that bill died, there's not the money available for doing a lot of the work that we had hoped would come about. If you don't find a way to bring carbon into the economic system, to actually internalize the externalities of that pollution, and that's a sort of a complicated way of saying that we need to find a way to price carbon, and then the revenues that come off that carbon pricing need to be used to drive these new jobs and to make our buildings more efficient, to make our automobiles more, we do all the things that we need to do to get away from a carbon pollution source, to create the new technologies to advance the overall agenda. And I think the very people who have attacked the climate legislation are the same people saying, green jobs, where are the green jobs? Well, they helped to kill the green jobs, and now they're attacking the fact that we don't have the jobs to the extent that we should have. So we missed a huge opportunity. I think it's time for us to find, I don't really care how we do it, but we need to bring carbon from an externality, from a pollution to a mechanism to pay for the kind of transformations that we need. We need to pay for these things, and it needs to be connected, I think, to the carbon pollution itself. So in my mind, that's a more holistic look at it, but it's one that absolutely needs to happen in the very near future.
This is the last one.
And our final question.
It's not a question. I have the answer to your questions. I'm Franz Retzer. I'm a member of the statewide organizing for community empowerment in Tennessee. And I'm an engineer originally from Switzerland. But the answer to your carbon emission reduction is concentrated solar energy in the electric power generation. And that's simply for people who are absolutely not familiar with this thing is you take mirrors or parabolic mirrors and concentrate the sunlight so that you can create about 600-degree hot oil, which you feed into a eutectic container with eutectic salt, which will melt, and that is your battery to run then the rest of the regular, in principle, you replace the boiler that burns the coal with the sun. And so, and this has been done and studied in Europe for quite some time, and especially our southern states are in the solar zone that will work very well with this kind of principle, not the same like in Germany, where they are in the northern area, and but they still study this, and I think that is the answer to our future.
Well, thank you. Yeah, if sunny Germany can do it, certainly we can, right? I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us, and thank you all for your very good questions.